We're back here with another interim clip. The project is installing a AEM digital coolant gauge to Little Red. Here's where we're at. So since the last time we saw you, we were fabricating, kind of working back and forth on this hose, trying to get the proper amount cut off on both ends to insert what you see there, which is the that's the Mishimoto inline coolant temp sensor coupler. You can't see the M. There's a beautiful white M on the other side, but the reason that you can't see it is we rotated it because we didn't want that. As you can see down there, that's the sensor and the wires from the sensor. We didn't want that just sticking up in the air here on the top of our engine bay. And if you look, it looks pretty good. This is a show car, and even though you can't tell because there's coolant all over the front of the timing cover, that's because when we pulled the hose off, some of it splashed around, but don't worry about that. We'll definitely clean that before we call it a wrap. But what we've done is we've gotten the hose cut, we've got the coupler in, the sensor is mounted, and we've already kind of pre-routed the sensor cable, so you see it coming back. It marries up right here with a couple of zip ties to the OEM temp sensor that goes to the gauge in the dash, which is just a needle gauge. It's this one I'm pointing at. The other one I'm pointing at now, that is the temp sensor for coolant to the engine control unit, the ECU. And then what we've done is we've routed behind the timing cover, just basically following those other two cables, and I think they go down under the intake manifold to the wiring harness, but we are not going to the wiring harness, so you can kind of see through that whole our cable. What we've done is we brought it around. It's actually on the back side of this vacuum hose, just kind of under. You can probably see it if I can get the camera right. We just routed it right around and up, following this big vacuum hose around, and then to, let me see if I can get the light position, to about right here is where we stopped routing, because we have to splice in more wiring, sensor wire, and the reason for that is, and I'll show you. So these are the two wires, sensor wires, is the green and black that we cut. The reason we cut it is because there's not enough cable for that to fit through the firewall and up to the gauge location that we want to mount it. So we're going to go to Ace Hardware, or wherever we have to go. Probably go to Ace Hardware first. Try to get some small gauge wire. Ideally it would be almost this exact gauge. We're going to splice in, I don't know, quite a few feet. We'll splice it in on this side. We'll route it back through the firewall down to where the gauge is going to be plugged into this white connector. We're going to, all this extra wiring, all this harness that really you don't need because you're already working with a gauge under your dash. You maybe need a foot. There's probably 3 feet there, and the cable that you need the most distance is the coolant temp sensor cable, this one, that they did not provide enough. So shame on you, AEM. That's our main negative on this install, is we've had to cut factory OEM wires, and we're gonna have to splice in some new wires to get the length we need, and that's just the way it is, and that's what's happening. So we're taking a break from the action. We're gonna do a little parts run, get some more wires, splice those in, get the length that we need, and we'll probably just go ahead and get enough wire, and then we'll just route it the exact same length that you see curled up there, so all the wires will be equal length, and then we'll cut and trim when we get ready to run the plus 12 volts DC in the ground. So that's where we are. We're going to be bringing this with us, see if we can try to get as close to that gauge as possible, and we'll come back and show you more. The next phase is under the dash, which is so much fun in this car. If you've watched previous videos where we installed this AEM boost gauge and that AEM GPS speedo, we just repositioned that Zytronics ZT4 wideband, dual wideband air fuel ratio gauge. We just repositioned it. It was already in the car, mounted on the right side of the steering column. But if you remember, if you look back in here, it looks like kind of looks like a rat's nest, but some intelligent rats are doing some pretty interesting splicing. But we've got right now we have 2 gauges and the Aeromotive 16307 Phantom fuel pump harness, all routed to that one jumper. We're going to add a new one back on the lighter instead of trying to add a third 12-volt source there. We could, we have spares. It just seems like adding a lot, but we might have one more in there, and you'll have basically that started out as the Aeromotive plus 12 for the Phantom fuel harness. That's the fuel pump wiring harness, and those 2 little red wires you see up at the top, those are just jumpered in. 12 volts for the AEM GPS speedo and the AEM boost gauge. Now we're adding an AEM coolant gauge, and we might just do it the exact same way that you see now. And just add a third wire there. So we'll determine all that here later. First step is complete, and that was the most important step, was getting this hose off, getting the coupler, kind of gauging the distance that we needed, cutting it and getting it in line, and getting that coupler with the sensor in line, and the cable routed back to, you see where it is, it's over there by the fuel pressure regulator. So we're in good shape, we just have to take a pause. And so when we get back and get into the engine bay, into the passenger compartment, we're in the engine bay now. I will give you another clip, and we'll probably just do that one more when we get it wired in, and then one when we have it mounted and the engine is running. We'll show you that it works. Okay, so that's where we are. We'll talk to you soon.